So welcome to the second week of the school and one of the first course in this particular week. So on behalf of ICTS and the organizers, I'm delighted to welcome a long-term collaborator, Luc Blanchet. Luc Blanchet is currently at the IAP in Paris in the Greco group. And as many of you would know, Luc's the post-Newtonian formalism, which we use today in its most mature form, really has its origins in his thesis, for example, in the 1980s. For example, in his PhD thesis and his doctoral thesis, the formalism, which later matured today to calculate the 3.5 p phasing, really comes from. So you are going to be exposed to the post-Newtonian theory from the master himself. Look.
Thank you, Bala. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bala and Ajit, for invitation at this school. So we shall have lectures, a series of lectures on gravitational waves in general relativity. So our standard gravity theory, general relativity. We shall almost not discuss about alternative theories of gravity. And especially, we shall focus on analytic approximation methods in general relativity for applied to gravitational waves, and specifically to the problem of the gravitational waves and the dynamics of compact binary systems made of black holes or neutron stars. But for this course, I understand that this is the second week of this school, and that you had previously a course on advanced general relativity. But nevertheless, I will start by re-deriving some basics about general relativity and the Einstein field equations in a form that is maybe different from the one that you have seen last week, but this will be in order to fix notations and to be sure that everybody is at the same level to follow the next courses on tomorrow and this week. So we shall just start today by some recalls about the main equations in this field that are the Einstein field equations, and this will be the occasion to give you some further remarks on what is going to happen later. So, the Einstein field equations derive from an action in general relativity, action principle, which is the Einstein-Hilbert action, which will be a functional of all the dynamical fields that describe the gravitational field and all the matter fields that we have in the universe. So the gravitational field will be described by the metric, which will be a second rank tensor, and there will be some matter fields that I will denote by psi. And this action will be given for describing the gravitational field by the Einstein-Hilbert action, which is an action that is, this is the time integral of a Lagrangian, and the Lagrangian will be the space integral of a Lagrangian density. And the Lagrangian density will be given by the scalar curvature, Riemannian curvature of the space-time, and the volume over which you integrate in space-time will be the scalar volume invariant, scalar volume element of your space-time. Volume element. in front of that term, there will be a coupling constant, which involves the speed of light and the gravitational constant, capital J. Yes? Oh, yes, okay, of course. Okay. And there will be a matter action describing the matter field, psi, in the presence of the gravitational G mu. And all the content of the Einstein field equations are contained into this action. In particular, you see that all the matter fields are universally coupled to the metric of space-time. Which is a way to implement the well-known, yes? Excuse me. Ah, larger U. Okay, very good. So can I write again? It. Okay. So the action will be a coupling constant multiplied by g4x square root of my g r, the Ricci curvature scalar, plus the matter action. Is that fine, like that? Okay. And the fact that all matter fields are coupled to the metric G mu nu in a universal way is due to the equivalence principle that all matter fields, and especially the weak equivalence principle, which tells you that all bodies, independently of the internal structure and composition and mass, will be accelerated in the same way in a given gravitational field, and this is encoded into this fact that the matter action is simply given by the matter fields propagating just in a space-time described by the metric G mu nu. So the invariant scalar volume element will be a scalar which is a particular type of tensor with 0 indices, 0 upper indices and 0 lower indices, and similarly, the scalar curvature will be also a scalar tensor 0, 0, while the metric will be a tensor with 2 lower indices, that I will write as 0, 2. And I just remind you a few things, that the inverse metric is also a tensor, but a contravariant tensor with 2 upper indices and 0 lower indices. And this is the inverse metric of space-time, satisfying G mu nu, G nu rho is equal to delta mu rho, and delta mu rho is a Kronecker tensor, which is a tensor 1, 1, with 1 upper index and 1 lower index. While the curvature scalar is constructed from the Riemann curvature tensor, which has 4 indices. It is a tensor 1, 3, and with my notations, my conventions, it is written as lambda mu nu rho. And as I usually consider that the more fundamental Riemann tensor has 4 indices which are lower indices and that are lowered down from the Riemann tensor in that form using the metric, so which is a tensor 0, 4. And the expression with my conventions of the Riemann tensor in terms of the Christoffel symbols are given by derivative nu of the Christoffel symbol minus this other terms, and there are 2 nonlinear terms in the Christoffel symbol that are mu rho lambda nu epsilon epsilon, and the other one epsilon epsilon rho. These are my conventions. I hope that they are the same as the course of last week, but if not, this is very easy to correct for the change in conventions. The Ricci tensor is a trace of the Riemann tensor with respect to its first and third indices, and this is a symmetric tensor, 0, 2, and finally the Ricci scalar is just the trace of the Ricci tensor. Okay. So now I am going to vary the Einstein-Hilbert action with respect to an arbitrary variation of the metric in order to obtain the field equations. So, vary the action with respect to a variation of the metric delta G mu nu, which will be arbitrary, except that we shall impose that the variation of the metric on the edge of space-time at infinity, that I will symbolize as delta G mu nu of at plus infinity, will be 0. And so I have to imagine that I have my Einstein-Hilbert action, which is a volume integral in space-time in a volume omega of space-time, which is a priori finite, or which may tend to the complete space-time. And so we assume that the variation of the metric on the edge of the space-time, which I will write as sigma, which will be the boundary of my 4-dimensional space-time volume, will be 0. In order to perform this variation, I will use some very useful identities that are called the Palatini identities, which will tell you what are the variation of the Christoffel symbol, which is here, and what are the variation in terms of the variation of the metric, and then in turn, what is the variation of the Ricci tensor in terms of the variation of the Christoffel symbol. There are therefore 2 identities. The first one tells you what is the variation of the Christoffel symbol. And this variation is given by the covariant derivative with respect to the unperturbed metric, G mu nu, which should be seen here as a background with respect to which you add a linear perturbation, and I am writing here the variation of the Christoffel symbol at linear order in the perturbation delta G of that background G, and the Palatini identity tells you what is the variation in terms of the covariant derivative with respect to the background G of your perturbed metric. Oh, minus. And here I have the inverse metric in front. So this is at linear order in the variation. Therefore, I am neglecting here terms like of the order of the square of the perturbation delta G. And then the second Palatini identity tells you what is the variation of your Ricci tensor in terms of the covariant derivative of the variations of your Christoffel symbol. So I will write here in yellow some exercise for you. I don't know if maybe you have already done that last week, but anyway, the exercise will be to prove first that even though the Christoffel symbol, which is here, is called a symbol because it is not a tensor, and I don't write the explicit expression of the Christoffel symbol that you have seen in your course of last week, but here, let us do the exercise is first to prove that even though gamma is not a tensor, the variation of gamma is a tensor one, 3. And then prove the two Palatini identities. 1, 2, 1, 2. Thank you. An indication to prove the Palatini identities is to use a particular coordinate system which is locally inertial. You have seen probably that last week. If you use local inertial coordinates at a given point in space-time, in this particular local inertial coordinates, the Christoffel symbols will be always 0. This is actually a consequence of the Einstein equivalence principle that you can remove locally at a given point in a particular coordinate system which is accelerated with all the bodies, you can remove the gravitational forces. And so the Christoffel symbols in that particular system are 0. Therefore, the covariant derivative will reduce to the ordinary derivative, and the metric itself will reduce to the Minkowski metric. So some hint for this exercise is to use locally inertial coordinates, say grand X, capital X, such that, so at a given point, such that at that point the metric reduces to the Minkowski metric and the derivative of the metric are 0. Hence, the Christoffel symbols are 0. But the derivative of the Christoffel symbols are not 0, and this will be this will give you the proof of the identity, knowing that the identities are identities between tensors. Yes? Excuse me. Oh, yes, okay. So Minkowski metric will be for me minus 1, 1, 1, 1, 0. So I use the signature plus, minus, minus, minus signature. That's the reverse. I was using the wrong signature used by particle physicists. The correct signature is here and is the one used by relativists. Good. So I am going to vary the Lagrangian density in my Einstein-Hilbert action. So I will vary the metric, and the metric appears both in the Ricci scalar and in the square root of the determinant of G, which belongs to the invariant volume element. And I will write that it is delta of square root minus G, G mu nu, R mu nu. And so I will have two terms. One will be this one, and then there will be a term which involves the variation of the Ricci tensor. And the variation of the Ricci tensor, I will get it using the Palatini identities. This will be given by square root minus G, the variation of the inverse metric, plus the variation of the square root of minus the determinant of the covariant metric, which I am writing as square root of minus G over 2. So it will be G rho sigma delta G rho sigma G mu nu. And is it clear for all of you that when you vary the determinant of the metric, this will be a linear combination of the variation of the covariant metric, which is given by that. This is a consequence of the law of variation of the determinant of a matrix, which gives you the variation of the determinant as a linear combination of all the variations of the element of that matrix. In order to get that. And you find that the two terms combine together to give you square root of minus G delta G mu nu multiplied by the tensor, which is the Einstein tensor, which is R mu nu minus 1/2 G mu nu R. And there is an extra term which can be computed using these identities. And the important point is that this extra term is in the form of a total divergence of some vector. Covariant divergence of some vector, where this vector, V mu, can be read immediately from the second Palatini identity. It is given by G rho sigma, the variation of my Christoffel symbol, minus G mu rho delta gamma sigma rho sigma. So if one ignores this second term, and this can be ignored because, in general, because it is actually the divergence of a vector, and therefore, by the Gauss theorem, it will be a term actually just living on the boundary of your spacetime sigma at infinity. And in most textbooks of general relativity, you will see that actually this term is ignored. This is equivalent to say that you adopt a variational principle in which not only the metric is zero at infinity, but also the derivative of the metric, which are contained into the variation of the Christoffel symbols, are zero at infinity. But in principle, but for a proper variation of the action, we have only to assume that the metric, the variation of the metric is zero at infinity. And therefore, in general, this term should be taken into account. So I will just spend 5 minutes to show what are the consequences of this term, and actually, what is the boundary term that you have to consider at infinity in the variation of the action. So let me just continue this calculation. This term V has been expressed, this vector V has been expressed in terms of the variation of the Christoffel symbol. And I can further use the first Palatini relation in order to obtain the expression of this term in terms of the variation of the metric at infinity. So use again the Palatini identities and obtain, so replace the variation of the Christoffel symbol by the expression which is here, and obtain that this vector field is given by the covariant derivative of delta G mu nu minus G mu nu G rho sigma delta G rho sigma. The first term will give you the usual looking Einstein field equations, and let us consider now the exact consequence of this term. So in the action, this term will be d for x square root of minus g d mu v mu, which will be a pure ordinary divergence, where I am using a formula valid for any divergence of a vector field. Probably you have seen this formula in the course of last week. And this is therefore given by a surface term using the Gauss theorem. A surface term, so when I integrate over the volume omega, this will be a term where I have to integrate on the boundary of omega, and I will write that this term will be a vector normal to the boundary of my spacetime multiplied by v mu. So surface term at the boundary of spacetime. So I have my volume in space-time, omega. I have my boundary sigma of this volume integral, this volume, and then the surface, the boundary of this volume will be made by regions that are space-like and regions that are time-like. So I will split this boundary into a space-like region, and with my convention, when it is space-like, there will be the light cone like that, so time is flowing this way, and my space-like hypersurface will be, there will be a normal vector, and the normal vector will be a time-like vector, which will be my volume of my volume element, which will be my vector d sigma mu, and I will write that this sigma mu, the normal element to my surface, is n mu d sigma, and n mu will be a unit vector which is time-like, and which is therefore, with my convention and my signature, inside the local light cone at that point. And n mu is time-like unit vector, that is, it satisfies g mu nu n nu is equal to -1. And on the other hand, when I am in the space-like part of the boundary, I will have my light cone like that, and my normal to the light cone will be space-like this time. And again, I will have n mu some the volume element. So the volume element here is d3x, that's the ordinary volume. And here, on that portion of the boundary, the volume element will be dt, some d omega, which will be a two-dimensional sphere on that surface, multiplied by the time generator perpendicular to along the time-like direction. And in that case, my n mu will be a space-like unit vector, which will therefore satisfy g mu nu n nu is +1 with my conventions. When my surface is space-like, in that portion of the surface, I can, sorry, probably this color cannot be seen very well. So when my surface is space-like, I will have the induced metric. Yes? Yes? Oh, yes, exactly. So this is a space-like surface, and therefore it corresponds to it a time-like vector. And here, this is a time-like surface. This, so I will have again the same, and this corresponds to a space-like vector. Okay. So when I have a space-like surface, I will have the metric on that surface, which is a so-called induced metric on the surface, which consists of the metric G mu nu plus the time-like vector n mu n nu. And when I have a time-like surface, the induced metric is given by gamma mu nu is equal to G mu nu minus n mu n nu. The induced metric is nothing but the projector of any vector in the bulk outside my surface onto the surface. Gamma mu nu is the projector. It projects any vector onto the surface. In particular, n nu gamma mu nu is 0. Oh yes, sorry. This is a projector, and so I will have n nu gamma mu nu is 0. And the basic property of a projector is that the projector square is equal to the projector, which is that gamma mu nu gamma nu rho is gamma mu rho. If you have already projected a vector on your surface, you can project it again, and that will be the same result. This is also called the first fundamental form on sigma, on the surface. You will probably see this terminology in your courses on numerical relativity. And the second fundamental form on the surface is a so-called extrinsic curvature on the surface, which is given by, which is a tensor, and this tensor involves the covariant derivative of my normal to the surface. This is the extrinsic curvature, the curvature of my surface as measured by an observer living in my four-dimensional space-time. And this is also called the second fundamental form on sigma. This second fundamental form on sigma, the extrinsic curvature, is a tensor, 0-2 tensor, by construction, but is also symmetric. Symmetric tensor, which is not obvious from that expression because you have index mu nu, but actually k mu nu is equal to k nu mu. I let you as an exercise to prove this prove K mu nu is symmetric, using the fact that the normal vector n is normal to an hypersurface, and then you have to use the Frobenius theorem for a vector n mu normal to the surface. So you may see with in the exercise, you look at what is the Frobenius theorem and try to prove this. And so there is the same formula for the time-like surface as well. And you have also the trace of the extrinsic curvature of second fundamental form, which is given by K, which is therefore gamma mu nu mu n nu. And I have written for you the formula for the trace, because I would like you to prove that actually this last term is nothing but an integral over the boundary of the trace of the extrinsic curvature. So this is a little bit outside the main course of for this week, so I will let you do this as an exercise, if you wish, and I will stop here for the recalls on the Einstein field equations and GR. So, let me write it like that. As another exercise, show that the integral over the surface d sigma mu v mu is nothing but the variation of the extrinsic curvature on your surface. And there is a factor -2 here. So it will be just an integral of d sigma, the variation of your extrinsic curvature, K, on the surface. And in order to prove that, you have also to use the basic property that the metric does not vary on the surface. The metric does not vary on the surface, and therefore the unit vector on the surface will not vary in the process, and there will be only the variation of the metric, which will be due just to the variation of the derivative of the metric on the surface. So finally, you can write the Einstein field equations, or the variation of the total action, as delta S of my action, which is there, as just an integral d for x square root minus g. So there will be the coupling constant, delta g mu nu, and the Einstein tensor. And there will be a term given by this one, which is in the form of a variation of a boundary term. And what I will do is that I will rewrite it on the left-hand side of my equation to say that the variation of my original action plus this term, an integral of sigma. So the variation was defined as a volume integral over omega of d sigma delta k. Yeah. Excuse me. Yes. Thank you. And this will be given by the Einstein tensor here plus the variation of the matter action. Okay. So now we shall consider now the side of the Einstein field equation which concerns the matter field. So the matter fields are described by the matter action, Sm, which will be a functional of the matter field, psi, and of the metric G mu nu. S matter, which will be, say, an integral over d4x, and there will be a Lagrange density, a Lagrangian density for my matter fields, and the matter fields I will say that it is psi, and I will take for the matter field, for simplicity, a scalar field. Zero, zero, scalar. And I will assume that, of course, the matter action depends on the field and its derivative for having a well-posed problem for the dynamics of this matter field. So I will have the action which depends also on derivatives of the scalar field, and also the action, as we said, depends on the metric. If I vary the matter action with respect to the metric, this gives me the definition of the stress energy tensor of the matter field. Namely, by definition, it's a definition, the variation of Sm when you keep fixed the matter fields but you vary the metric is given by 1/2 g4x square root minus g t mu nu, and the linear variation of the metric. The t mu nu is therefore given by 2, I will write it as 2 over square root of minus g, the variation of the matter action with respect to the metric G mu nu. So you see that if I redefine my action principle by adding this boundary term, then the Einstein field equation will just take the ordinary form in the right-hand side of which you have the standard stress energy tensor for your matter field. You get the Einstein field equation as G mu nu is equal to 16 pi G over C4 times the G mu nu, which is the ordinary form of the Einstein field equations. All that looks probably a little bit complicated to you, but I think this is more complete, and I think this is an occasion to revise many notions, basic notions on GR in that way. In order to prove that, so you know that there will be, you have seen last week that if you have the Bianchi identity, the divergence of the Einstein tensor will be zero, therefore the covariant derivative of the matter stress energy tensor will be zero, and usually one says this is equivalent to the equations of motion of the matter fields. Yes? Yes? No, I don't think so. This is minus when you have the covariant derivative here. Minus G delta Sm delta de G mu nu with upper indices here. And you see that there are upper indices here. So I have to take into account the minus sign and therefore a plus sign here. Thank you for the question. So, generally, we say the covariant conservation of the stress energy tensor is the equations of motion of your matter fields. And this is, we can stop here, but let me show you for 5 minutes the basic reason for that, and this is very interesting. It is a consequence, actually, of the fact that here you have defined your action in a completely covariant way, and in particular, the matter action should be a scalar. It should be invariant by a change in your coordinate system. And let me show you here that this implies that indeed the covariant derivative of the stress energy tensor is indeed given by the equations of motion for the matter fields. Yes? Yes, this is what we are going to do. We shall vary now with respect to the matter fields in order to get the equations of motion of the matter fields. We have two fields, the metric and the matter field. We have, therefore, two equations associated with that. So, yes? Another question? Excuse me. No. The T mu nu is a tensor because this can be seen here. You have a scalar, which is here, and here this is a tensor. The action is a scalar, and therefore T mu nu is a tensor. You have to divide by square root of minus g in order to get a tensor. Just delta S over delta G would the. Yes, sorry, my notation is a bit, I should write that it is actually delta Lm over delta G mu nu, which would be a more logical notation, but all people are used to say that it is a derivative of the action itself. We forget about the integration, that notation. Okay. No, this is exactly that. So let me write it. Sorry, yes. So, yes, okay. So this implies that T mu nu, okay, will be minus 2 over square root of G delta Lm delta G upper. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so let me come back to my problem with a scalar field. So I vary Sm with respect to psi. Okay? And as usual, we have to assume that psi, the variation delta psi at plus infinity, is zero, vanish, on the boundary of my space-time at sigma. So I will have delta S matter, which will be, so G for X. I will have all these terms coming from the variation, delta psi, delta Lm over delta psi, plus delta of d mu psi, d Lm over d mu psi. And I will have, and that's all, if I want to vary with respect to the field psi independently of the metric. But let me be a little bit more general and vary with respect to the two fields. So I will add also a term which comes from the variation of the metric, which would be delta G mu nu GLM over G mu nu, and this will be a general variation. And now I can use the fact that the field is zero at infinity and perform an integration by part and put that derivative on the other side of the integration, and the surface term will be zero because of delta psi is zero. For the matter field, we don't have the problems that we met for the metric. There was dependence left on the derivative of the metric, which is not there for the matter field. And therefore, I will rewrite this as delta psi. So I am performing an integration by part as usual in the Lagrangian formalism. So do an integration by parts to rewrite the variation as delta m over delta psi, where delta m, delta Lm over delta psi with the derivative minus G mu delta L m over delta psi. This is a functional derivative of the Lagrangian with respect to the field, psi. And I will have an extra term here that I can rewrite using the stress energy tensor. Delta G mu nu, G mu nu. So I get a very general and completely general variation of the matter action. Yes? Yes. It comes from the integration by part of that term. Is that? No, I think this is correct. So you find something. This is the usual expression of the Lagrange field equations, Lagrange equations obtained by the variation of the matter action with respect to the sorry. Ah, yes, okay. Like that? Okay, sure. Thanks very much. Yeah, okay. So this is a very general, completely general variation of the matter action. And now, to get the equations of motion of matter, you have to vary with respect to the matter field, holding the metric fixed. And so this gives you that just delta Lm over delta psi is 0. But let me now show you that actually this equations of motion comes also from the convergent derivative of the matter stress energy tensor. For that, we just use the fact that the scalar action is a scalar. And it should be invariant under a change of coordinate system, an infinitesimal change in your coordinate system. It should be invariant when you perform a change of coordinates an infinitesimal change of your coordinate system that I will write as x mu minus epsilon mu of x, where epsilon mu is much less than x. It is invariant. It means that the equations of motion will be the same in the two coordinate systems, and the dynamics will be completely identical. So the matter action in the first coordinate system is given by this, but this means that in the second coordinate system, it should be given by, again, a Lagrangian density of the new fields on the new coordinates, and the new metric of the new coordinate system. And the point is that the Lagrange density of my action should be the same in the two coordinate systems. So this will be Lm, which is the same as this Lagrangian density, which is here. So that the physics will remain the same, the dynamics of the matter field will be the same in the two coordinate systems. The new coordinate system here is used as an integration variable, so it's a dummy variation, so it's actually just a variable of integration. I can change x, which is a dummy variable. So I can write it as d prime x with respect to x, while here I have the new fields, psi, and here I will have the ordinary derivative of the new field psi prime and the new metric. And comparing the new action with respect to the old one, you see that there should be an identity which should be satisfied for any change in your coordinate system that I am rewriting as integral d for x of dlm over d psi, functional derivative over d psi, which I have defined here, time an object, which will be epsilon mu. So I will write it like, so there will be another L epsilon psi plus square root of minus G over 2 G mu nu of L epsilon G mu nu. Let me write it as a capital L in order not to confuse with the Lagrangian density, where L epsilon psi is the Lie derivative of psi in the direction epsilon. This is defined as psi prime, the new field in the new coordinate system x prime, but computed at x, as compared to psi of x. And since psi is a scalar, this is also given by epsilon mu grad mu of psi. Probably most of you are familiar with the Lie derivative, so I just remind you very rapidly. And the Lie derivative of the metric is again the new metric minus the old metric, but evaluated and compared at the same coordinate point x. And this is given by 2 the covariant derivative of the vector epsilon mu nu. So if you are not familiar with the Lie derivative, I leave you as an exercise to prove these formulas with Lie derivative. So now we would like that the action be an invariant when we change our coordinates in a completely arbitrary way, so with any infinitesimal small vector epsilon mu. And we see that from that expression, using the expression of the Lie derivatives here, you find that for any epsilon mu, which is a vector field, we should have that 0 is integral d3x of that with that, and so I am just writing like that. So this would be delta Lm over delta psi epsilon mu psi. And for this term, I will replace this by that. And in order to have epsilon nu as a factor of something, I will perform an integration by part. And to put this derivative on the left-hand side, modulo a total divergence, which will be 0 for the variation. And so I get that there is the second term will be just minus square root of g. The derivative here will act on the stress energy tensor, and therefore you will get that T, just T mu nu times epsilon nu. And this should be 0 for any vector field epsilon mu, and therefore you find that the divergence of the stress energy tensor, T mu nu, multiplied by square root of minus g, is directly related to the Lagrangian variation with respect to the scalar field of the matter action for the scalar field, delta Lm over delta psi. This is an identity which shows that the divergence of the stress energy tensor is 0 when the equations of motion of matter delta Lm over delta psi that are given here are satisfied. Or, put in another way, the divergence, covariant divergence of the stress energy tensor is equivalent to the dynamics of the matter fields. And this argument can be generalized completely to any matter fields, even spinors, classical fields and spinor fields and so on. So the Einstein field equations, by using the Bianchi identities, implies the equations of motion for the matter fields. By the way, if you apply this argument not to the matter action, but also to the Einstein-Hilbert action, which will be a scalar also, okay? And this argument will give you directly the Bianchi identity for the Einstein tensor, and therefore this will be completely satisfied. So the Bianchi identity is a consequence of the fact that the matter action, the gravitational action, is a scalar with respect to arbitrary change, infinitesimal change of coordinate systems. Okay, so I think that I have still 15 minutes. And I will now move to specific matter fields that we shall use later in the course. So the simplest matter fields that we shall consider is a matter field made of n point particles and to describe this, we shall just assume that these are n particles described by their masses m, say A, and that these particles are moving in a given space-time with metric g mu nu, which is fixed. We can consider that it is fixed, and we may vary also the metric as well to get the stress energy tensor of these n particles. So we shall have our space-time, and we shall have n particles in our space-time. I will describe them by a 4 velocity, which is the word line of particle A, the word line of particle B. I will write that the position in space-time of my particle A will be YA. And the 4 velocity u mu of particle A will be given by the derivative of the word line YA with respect to proper time of particle A. D tau A is a proper time of particle A, which will be given by the metric G mu nu computed at A, and the variation mu dy A mu. And for this case, very simple case, the matter action will just be the integral of the proper times along the word lines of all the particles. So we shall have a sum over all the particles of minus ma, integral from minus infinity to plus infinity of d tau A. If I vary my action with respect to the metric, I will get the stress energy tensor of the system of n point particles. I will get delta S mu nu Sm, which will be a sum over the particles. And so I have to vary this quantity with respect to the metric, and so the calculation is immediate. We shall have minus delta G mu nu computed in A dy A mu dy A nu divided by the square root. And the square root, I just rewrite it as d tau A. And since there is a square root here, I should have a 1/2 in front. And comparing, yes? Ah, yes, sorry. So, the variation will be given by sum over particle minus ma, and I have the variation of that, so there will be 1/2 square root on the denominator, which will be my proper time, and then I will have minus delta G mu nu A dy A mu dy A nu. So the stress energy tensor for my particles will be a sum over all the particles of the masses. So I am just comparing with the definition that we had written somewhere before of the stress energy tensor, which is defined precisely as the linear coefficient in the variation of my matter action with respect to the metric J mu nu. And from that, I get, and here I have an integral over minus infinity to plus infinity of the proper time, but the stress energy tensor is defined with respect to an integration over space-time, and therefore I get some delta functions. And the expression of the stress energy tensor is, no, given by the integral from minus infinity up to plus infinity of delta function in 4 dimensions of x. So this will be a function of your space-time point, x. But the space-time point, there should be a delta of x minus y1. And I am missing here a square root of minus g in order that my stress energy tensor be a tensor and not a tensor density. If you vary with respect to particles, so I will consider that my word line A is varied, that is, I will have my point YA, and I will consider a variation delta YA to get to the point YA plus delta YA. I can vary the matter action, and there will be a variation due to the variation of these quantities, and there will be also a variation due to the point at which the metric is computed, which is YA, which has to also to be varied. So I will get sum over A of minus MA 1 over 2 d to A, since I am varying the square root which is there, and there will be 2 terms coming from the variation of that. Minus 2 g mu nu A d delta y a mu dy a nu, and the variation of the ya which is there induces another term which depends on your metric rho sigma computed on A, dya rho dya sigma. And you obtain from the variation of the matter action that you obtain the equations of motion of your particles that can be rewritten just as d over d to A of g mu nu computed on A at point A. So you find an acceleration, okay, quantity which is an acceleration, but in the right-hand side you will have a gravitational force, G rho sigma computed on A, UA rho, UA sigma. So this equation of motion does not look so familiar maybe to some of you, but I will finish now by writing for you, proposing for you an exercise. Show that this equation is the equation of geodesics for the particles, which can be rewritten as the acceleration of my particle, the covariant acceleration of my particle, A mu A, which will be the derivative of the covariant derivative of the forward velocity in the direction of the forward velocity itself. This is the definition of the acceleration. UA mu is 0, which is the equation of motion. So I am just asking you to prove that this equation is equivalent to the ordinary geodesic equation for the motion of each of the particles. So you have seen that this system is very simple. Geodesic equation for the motion of each of the particles. But in this derivation, we have assumed that the background metric is fixed. And it will be a very complicated problem that we shall see in the next courses to obtain the equations of motion of the particles when the gravitational field, the metric, is generated by the system of particles itself. So that when we have a system of a self-gravitating system whose dynamics is produced by the field generated by the system itself. And we shall see in later courses how to handle this problem. So, and I will stop right here. Okay.